Wyoming Territory, late October 1874. The wind came down sharp from the Absaroka Range that morning, biting through layers like it meant to find bone. Inigo Granger pulled his coat tighter, one hand on his rifle, eyes picking through the scattered brush and broken fence posts outside of Rivet Creek. He had not intended to stop, he never did. But something moved near the edge of the charred homestead, something too small and too thin to be a bear, too desperate to be a deer. He crouched behind a buckled wagon axle, boots silent against the frozen dirt. Then he saw her. She was bent low, picking through the ashes of a collapsed barn. Her dress was torn near the hem, shoes barely holding together, and her fingers red from cold tugged cautiously at a rusted tin plate half buried in the dirt. She looked over her shoulder every few seconds, skittish the way starved things get. There was nothing left on this land but soot and ghosts, and she was digging through both. Inigo stepped out slow, rifle lowered but ready. "You lost?" he asked. The girl spun, eyes wide, jaw clenched. She did not run, just stared like she had already done all her running and found nowhere left to go. "I ain't stealing," she said. "Ain't nothing left here worth stealing anyhow." "I know." He nodded once and slung the rifle behind his shoulder. "This place has been dead near 3 months. She looked down at the tin in her hand, then let it fall, her arms crossed over her chest, not for modesty but to hold herself together. "What happened to the folk that lived here?" she asked, voice quiet. "Raid," he said. "Maybe bandits, maybe just bad luck. House caught fire, no one made it." She nodded like she had expected that answer. "What's your name?" he asked. Vera Zane." She spoke like each word cost her. Inigo stepped closer. "You from around here?" "No, came from Kansas." "Been walking west near 2 weeks." She looked up at him then, chin lifting like she was daring him to laugh. "I lost everything. My brother, the wagon, got nothing left but a name and half a blanket." Inigo studied her. She was young but not a child, maybe 20, maybe less. Her face was smeared with ash, her lips cracked, but her eyes were sharp even under all that fear. "You hungry?" "I can manage." He pulled his pack from his shoulder, crouched, and opened it slow. From it, he took a wrapped piece of hard bread, a strip of dried venison, and the one thing he had not planned on giving away, a wool blanket, thick and warm, still smelling faintly of smoke from his last campfire. He held it out. "You look like you need this more than I do." She stared at it. "I ain't asking for anything," he added. Vera stepped forward and took the blanket with both hands. She did not thank him, not out loud, but the way she held it to her chest, like it was something holy, said enough. Inigo stood again and looked out toward the broken land. "There's a creek a mile north, clean water, might be some rabbit if we are lucky." She hesitated. "You can come," he said. "Or stay, but if you stay, you will freeze by nightfall." Vera looked down at the blanket, then up at his face. "I do not know you." "No, you don't." "Why are you helping me?" Inigo looked at her for a moment before answering. "I have done a lot of wrong in my life. I figure helping someone like you might be one of the few right things I got left." That was the truth. He had robbed rail lines, pulled pistols in saloons, outrun marshals in 3 territories. But none of that mattered right now. She looked at his face a long time, then nodded once. "All right." They walked together, side by side, through the brittle grass, past the blackened bones of the homestead and into the trees. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and for the first time that day, her hands stopped shaking. They made camp by the creek as the sun dipped low. Inigo built the fire while Vera washed the ash from her face and braided her hair back with trembling fingers. He cooked what little he had and gave her the larger share. She did not argue. Later, as the wind picked up and night fell hard, she sat close to the flames. Inigo watched her from the other side. "My brother's name was Milo," she said, voice soft. "He was 16, took care of me after Ma died. We were supposed to make it to Oregon." Inigo did not speak. He just watched her, letting her say what she needed to. "We were crossing the Medicine Bow Ridge when our wagon wheel cracked. Horses ran. He went after them, told me to wait. I waited all night. He never came back." He saw the way she curled into herself then, like the memory hurt her body as much as her heart. "He might still be out there," Inigo said gently. "No," she whispered. "He is gone." She looked up, her face lit orange by firelight. "Why are you out here? You running from someone?" "No," he said, "but I am not looking to be found either." She nodded like she understood. They sat quiet a while after that. The kind of silence that only comes between people who have lost too much to fill space with empty talk. That night, he gave her his coat and lay on the colder side of the fire. She tried to argue, but he shook his head. "You already took the blanket," he said with a small smile. "Might as well take the rest of me too." Her cheeks flushed, but she did not look away. Inigo did not sleep much. He watched the stars instead, the way they blinked hard against the black. When he looked over, she was wrapped in the blanket, asleep. Her brow eased for the first time since he had met her. By morning, he knew. He knew she was not just a stray soul crossing his path. She was it. The one he had not known he was waiting for. He had seen too much blood, carried too many sins, but she made him want to lay them all down. When she woke, he handed her coffee and said, "I know it ain't proper, but I am not the kind of man who waits around for permission." Vera blinked at him, confused. "I gave you a blanket," he said, "and now I am giving you me, all of me." She stared at him, stunned. "I want you as my bride," he said simply. "Not just for now, for always." She did not answer right away. Her lip trembled, but her eyes did not look away from his. "You do not even know me. I know you are strong, I know you are kind, I know you did not break, even when the world tried to tear you down. That is enough for me." Tears slipped down her cheeks, quiet and free. "You do not have a ring," she said softly. "No," Inigo said, "but I got a name. And I got hands that will build you a home if you let me." Vera looked at him for a long time, then she reached across the fire and took his hand in hers. "All right," she whispered. "Yes." And just like that, the outlaw who had once only ridden for himself found someone worth staying for. By the third morning, frost clung to the grass like sugar, and the firewood stack had grown low. Vera crouched beside the stones, coaxing the last orange embers to life with careful breath. Inigo stood by the mule, cinching the last strap on the pack saddle, his movements quiet, practiced. The silence between them wasn't uneasy, it carried something steady now, something shared. They walked west along the creek's curve, boots soft on frozen moss and pine needles. The trail wasn't marked, but Inigo seemed to know where he was going. Vera didn't ask. She followed, her new boots stitched from the hide of a deer Inigo had taken the morning before, creaking faintly with each step. Around midday, they reached a shallow gulch where the wind dipped low, and the sun found them through bare cottonwoods. A rusted signpost, half swallowed by lichen, marked the remnants of a trail once used by fur traders. Inigo paused there, looking out over the ridge. "There's a settler's cabin about 6 miles on," he said. "Built by a Swede fella I knew. He died 2 springs ago. No kin came for it." Vera stepped beside him, squinting toward the hills. "It's still standing. Last I saw, the roof held. Might be wood left inside. If it's dry, we can winter there." She didn't answer right away. Her gaze traced the land, wide and open, the kind of space that made a person feel small in the best way. "I can help patch it," she said. "If it's worth saving." He gave a slow nod. "Then we'll call it ours." They reached the cabin just before dusk. It sat nestled in a stand of junipers, walls gray with weather and time. One shutter hung loose, tapping lazily in the wind. Inside, the hearth was cold, spiderwebs tracing long strands across the beams, but the floor held and the roof didn't leak. Vera stepped over the threshold and ran her fingers along the windowsill. "I never had a house of my own," she murmured. Inigo set down the packs. "Then this one starts fresh with no ghosts but the ones we choose to keep." That night they slept inside, no fire, but the walls kept the wind at bay. Vera curled beneath the blanket, her back to the hearth, and Inigo lay beside her, his breathing slow and even. Neither reached for the other, but their shoulders touched and neither moved away. In the days that followed, they worked. Inigo felled 2 standing dead pines behind the ridge and split them by hand. Vera cleared the hearth, washed the stone floor with melted snow, and stitched curtains from the canvas sack that had once held beans. They didn't speak more than they needed, but when they did, it was always new. One morning she stood outside, sleeves rolled past her elbows, scrubbing soot from a cast iron pan with pine needles. Inigo watched from the doorway. "You ever think of going back to Kansas?" he asked. She didn't look up. "There's nothing left there. Still some folk turn toward what burned even after its ash." "I won't," she wrung the cloth dry. "I'd rather build something than mourn it." He stepped down the stoop and took the pan from her hands. "Then we'll build it together." She let him take it, her fingers brushing his. "You always this sure about things?" "No," he said, "only you." Vera looked up at him then, eyes steady. "I never thought a man like you would want a woman like me, a man like me." His voice was quiet, worn, older. "Carrying things I can't name." Inigo held her gaze. "Then you understand me better than anyone ever has." Later that week, a storm came down from the north. They spent 2 days inside, wind howling against the shutters. Vera sorted dried herbs by lamplight, humming softly, while Inigo repaired the doorframe. On the second night, the wind died down and the silence stretched long. Vera sat by the hearth, knees pulled to her chest, her eyes on the flames. "When I was little," she said, "Ma used to tell me to look for the kind of man who could stay through winter." Inigo laid his tools down, and she died before I ever found one. She turned then, her face half lit. "But you stayed." Inigo crossed the room and knelt beside her. "I'll stay through all of them," he said, "not just the cold ones." Her hand reached for his, unhurried. When her fingers slid into his palm, it wasn't hesitant, it was a choice. They didn't kiss, not yet. But they didn't have to. The fire crackled low and the wind had stopped looking for cracks. There in the stillness, something had settled between them. Not finished, but begun. By mid-November, the snow had settled low in the hollows, not deep enough to trap them, but enough to quiet the land. The trees stood bare, their branches black against the pale sky, and the days passed without urgency. Inigo carved wooden shingles for the lean-to he planned to raise come spring, and Vera began sewing a quilt from scraps they'd traded for at the nearest homesteader's post. She stitched by lamplight, her needle steady, her face set with the kind of calm that didn't come easy to people who'd lost as much as she had. One evening, Inigo returned from checking the snares with blood on his shirt and a deep cut across his forearm. He said nothing when he came through the door, just hung his coat and set down 2 pheasants, their feathers still damp with snow. Vera crossed the room in 3 steps. "What did that wire trap caught wrong?" he said. "Pulled too fast. Sit." She was already wetting a cloth in the basin. "You'll lose the arm if it festers." He sat at the table and let her clean the wound without protest. Her fingers were gentle but firm, pressing the edges of the skin together as she worked. When she began stitching it closed, she didn't look up. "You've done this before. In Kansas, I used to help an old woman who tended miners," she said. "She taught me what to do when bones snapped or blades slipped." Inigo watched her face, the way her brow furrowed in concentration. "You talk more when you're worried." "I talk when I care," she said quietly. The stitching finished, she wrapped the wound with a strip of boiled linen and tied it off. He flexed his fingers and winced, then looked at her hand where it still rested on his. "You never asked what I did before I found you." "I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd say," Vera replied. "I used to ride with men who took more than they earned. I wasn't proud of it, but I was good at it." Her eyes didn't flinch. "You don't take now." "No," he said. "Not anymore." She stood and poured water from the kettle into a tin cup, then handed it to him. "Then you're not that man now." When he took the cup, his fingers brushed hers. "You forgive too easy." "No," she said. "I forgive when I see a man trying to be better." That night, she added another log to the fire and sat beside him on the floor, her shoulder against his good arm. He didn't speak, didn't move closer. But he let his head tilt until it rested lightly against hers, and they stayed that way until the flames burned low. The next morning, she rose before him and went out to fetch water. Outside, the sky was pale with the first light of dawn, and the snow crunched beneath her boots. The creek had begun to freeze at the edges, and she had to break through the crust to fill the pail. On the way back, she saw tracks in the snow small, rounded, leading toward the cabin from the east. She set the pail down slowly, eyes narrowing. "Inigo," she called once inside. "You best come see this." He came to the door with the rifle slung low, his eyes narrowing when she pointed. He crouched and studied the tracks. "Child's feet," he said, "or small woman." "Not heavy. They lead straight here." He followed them to the edge of the tree line where they vanished into thicker brush. When he returned, he shook his head. "Whoever it was, they watched us, maybe for days." That night, he kept the fire low and the shutters latched. Vera didn't ask what he would do if they came back. She just sat across from him, arms folded, waiting. 2 days later, she saw her. A girl maybe 12 stood just beyond the trees, wrapped in a wool shawl too large for her. Her face was thin, lips chapped, but her eyes were defiant. Vera stepped out slowly, hands empty, her voice soft. "You're hungry." The girl didn't answer, only stared. "We've got stew," Vera said. "You can eat and go if that's what you want." The girl looked past her toward the cabin. "Inigo's inside," Vera added. "He won't hurt you." Still, the girl didn't come, so Vera turned, went back inside, and left the door open. An hour passed before the girl stepped over the threshold. She didn't speak, just sat near the hearth and took the bowl Vera offered. Inigo said nothing, only handed her a wool sock he'd mended and watched as she pulled it over her bare foot when she'd eaten. Vera crouched beside her. "What's your name?" "Ellie." "You out here alone?" The girl hesitated, then gave a short nod. "No more," Vera said. "Not if you stay." Ellie looked at her then, and Vera saw something crack in that hard little face, not weakness, but the sudden shock of being seen. Inigo set another log on the fire. "There's space enough for 3. Ellie's eyes flicked toward him. "You two married?" Vera didn't glance away. "Not by paper, but by choice." Ellie blinked. "You choosing him?" "I already did." The girl didn't speak after that. She just sat watching the fire, her eyes heavy. Later, when Vera laid a pallet beside the hearth, Ellie crawled onto it without protest. Inigo stood by the window, watching the moon rise through the trees. "She won't stay unless she wants to." "I know," Vera said softly, "but I hope she does." He turned to her, his features worn by the firelight. "You've changed this place." "No," she said. "You built the walls." "I just filled them." He crossed to her then, and for the first time placed a hand gently along her jaw. "I mean to marry you in truth," he said. "With a preacher and a ring. When the road's clear, I'll find one." Vera took his other hand and pressed it over her heart. "You already gave me what matters." Outside, the wind had gone still. Inside, 3 people slept, and for the first time in a long while, none of them dreamed of hunger or fire or running. The cabin held. The warmth did too. They made it through winter on dried meat, root vegetables, and whatever small game Inigo could still find when the snow crusted enough for him to track. Vera learned to stretch flour with cornmeal and boiled pine needles when their tea ran out. Ellie, quieter now but no longer wary, took to carving simple shapes from leftover kindling, leaving small wooden birds and rabbits along the windowsill. By early March, the thaw had started. Icicles dripped from the eaves, and the creek ran louder, pulling at the ice until it cracked and slipped away downstream. Vera stood in the doorway one morning, sleeves rolled, her hands wrapped around the first batch of soap she'd made from tallow and ash. The cabin smelled faintly of lye and juniper. Inigo was mending a broken stirrup strap at the table, leather spread beneath his fingers. "You ever think of bringing anyone else here?" Vera asked. He looked up, brow creased. "Family, old friends," she added. "Anybody left you might still owe something to." He pulled the thread through the leather and tied it off before answering. "There's a man in Montana who once pulled me out of a canyon after a shootin'. Name's Latham. I owed him my life, but he told me not to come back. Said some debts are better paid in silence. Do you ever wonder if he regrets saying that?" "I do," Inigo said, "but I don't think he does." She nodded and stepped inside, setting the soap on the shelf beside the flint and oilskin. "I don't want any part of your past catching up here." "It won't," he said. "I buried it far enough back." Ellie came in from the woodshed then, her coat dusted with sawdust and her cheeks pink from the cold. "There's a man down the ridge," she said, breath short. "He's got a wagon, 2 mules. Said he's looking for shelter." Inigo stood, his hand already moving toward the rifle. "He asked if a woman lived here," Ellie added. Vera's stomach turned. "What kind of man?" "Older, beard like snow, he had a limp." Inigo was already pulling on his coat. "Stay inside," he said. "Bar the door behind me." "I'm coming with you," Vera said, her voice firm. He didn't argue, just passed her his knife and nodded once. They found the man waiting near the trail, one hand on the mule's reins, the other resting on a cane. He looked up as they approached, eyes sharp beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "I'm not here to cause harm," he said before Inigo could speak. "Name's Vera Zane. I'm looking for my sister." Vera froze. "I had word she was traveling west with a boy," the man continued. "Milo, she'd be about 20. Brown hair, name's Vera." She stepped forward slowly, hands trembling. "I thought you were dead," she said. "I thought the same of you." They stared at each other, both thinner than they once had been, both older somehow. "What happened to you?" she asked. "I was a week behind you when I got word there'd been a wagon wreck near Medicine Bow. I rode out but found nothing but broken wood and blood." He looked at her face, as if trying to match it with a memory. "I joined a cattle drive after that. Figured if you were gone, I'd ride until I couldn't anymore." Inigo watched the reunion without speaking, his grip loosening on the rifle. Brody looked at him then. "You the man she's with?" "I am. You treat her right, with everything I've got." Brody nodded once. "Then I'll rest easy tonight." They brought him to the cabin, gave him soup and a place to sleep near the hearth. Ellie watched him cautiously but relaxed when she saw Vera smile. That night, after Brody had gone quiet, Vera sat at the table beside Inigo, her hands wrapped around a cup of warm water. "I thought I'd buried that part of me," she said. "Kansas, Milo, Brody, all of it." "You didn't," Inigo said. "You carried it." "Same as I carry mine." She looked over at him, her eyes soft. "You were right, you know." "About what?" "Helping someone being one of the few right things left." He turned toward her, his hand covering hers. "It was never just help." "I know," she said. "I felt it the day you gave me that blanket." They sat in silence for a long while, the fire low, the wind outside soft against the cabin walls. When they finally stood, Vera reached for his hand and didn't let go. In the morning, Brody packed his things to head east again. He said the trail had always been his way, but now that he'd seen her safe, he could ride it lighter. Before he left, he took Inigo aside. "I've seen her starve and sleep in the dirt. If you ever leave her worse than I found her, I won't," Inigo said. "She's my home now." Brody looked at him a moment longer, then gave a short nod and rode on. That evening, Vera stood by the window, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. "You still want to marry me by paper?" she asked. "If you'll have me." "I'll have you," she said. "And I want Ellie to stand with us when we do." "She will," Inigo said. "She's part of us now." The last of the snow melted by the end of the week. The path to town would open before long, and with it, the chance for a ring, a name signed in ink, and a preacher's blessing. But for now, they had a roof, a fire, and each other. And for the first time in both their lives, they had enough. By late April, the mud had dried along the wagon tracks leading into Rivet Creek, and the dogwoods bloomed pink against the greening hills. Vera stepped down from the supply cart outside the general store, her boots landing in the dust with a soft thud. Ellie swung down beside her, arms wrapped tight around a bundle of wool, her new Sunday dress, stitched from the last of Vera's trade cloth. It had taken 3 weeks to sew by hand, and Ellie had asked each evening if it was ready yet, though she never said why she wanted it so badly. Inigo tied the mule to the post and gave his belt a tug. "Reckon I'll check on that horseshoe order." "You two want anything from inside?" Vera shook her head. "We'll be down by the river. Ellie wants to see if the trout are moving." Ellie didn't say anything, just held the bundle tighter and walked beside Vera, her face unreadable. They made their way down the slope behind the store, past the weeping willows and the wooden footbridge bleached pale by the sun. Once at the water's edge, Vera sat on a flat stone and waited. Ellie looked at her, hands fidgeting. "You think he's sure? About what? About marrying you?" Her voice was quiet. Vera met her eyes. "He carved our names into the cabin door with his good hand." Ellie's mouth twitched. "That don't mean much if a man spooks easy." "He doesn't," Vera said. "He stopped running a long time ago." Ellie took a breath and sat beside her. A fish darted through the shallows, but neither of them watched it. "I want to wear the dress to the wedding," Ellie said. "If that's all right." Vera smiled. "It's why I made it." They sat a while longer, and Vera let the girl rest her head against her shoulder. The wind ruffled the tree branches overhead. When they returned to the main street, Inigo stood beside the post with a small wrapped box in his palm. He handed it to Vera without a word. Inside was a ring, thin, plain silver, but smooth and warm from his touch. "I had it made in Laramie last month," he said. "Didn't want to bring it out till it felt right." She didn't cry. She only slid the ring on and laced her fingers through his. They were married under the cottonwoods 3 days later, with the preacher from Greystone riding out to say the words. Vera wore a pale blue dress borrowed from the storekeeper's wife. Ellie stood between them and held both their hands before stepping aside so the preacher could speak. When he asked if they would keep to each other not just through storm and fire, but in quiet, and Inigo said yes, he said it like it was a promise forged long before this day. Vera's voice didn't shake when she answered. She didn't need to be brave for this. She only needed to be true. After, they ate jam biscuits and ham brought by the neighboring families and danced in the grass behind the store. Ellie sat on Inigo's shoulders for one song, laughing so hard she hiccuped. That night, they returned home together, the three of them, and the cabin door opened to firelight and the scent of wild sage Vera had hung in the rafters. Later, as the stars stretched quiet over the roof and Ellie slept beneath her quilt in the corner room, Vera stood by the hearth and watched Inigo pour water into the basin. He caught her watching and wiped his hands on a cloth. "You didn't ask what I'd do now," he said. "Now that I've got you." "I figured I'd see it for myself." He crossed to her, took her hand, and pressed it to his chest. "I'll build you a garden behind the cabin, not just beans and squash, flowers too, the kind that stay through frost." She leaned into him, her voice low. "And what if I want hens? Then I'll trade for 6 and build you a coop." She looked up at him. "And if I want more than Ellie someday," he held her gaze. "Then we make room." She wound her arms around him, and he kissed her slow, certain, the way a man does when he's not reaching for anything except what he already holds. That spring passed with no trouble. The roof didn't leak, the mule foaled strong, and Ellie read aloud each evening from a primer Vera traded for. When summer came, they put up shelves in the back room and built a cradle from the leftover pine boards. They didn't speak of what might fill it, not yet, but they built it just the same. 2 years passed. The garden bloomed, the hens laid, and Ellie grew into her own taller, steadier, with a voice that didn't tremble when she spoke. When she asked if she could call Vera Ma, it wasn't a question for permission, just a quiet naming of what had already been true. By the 3rd spring, Vera gave birth to a boy with her eyes and Inigo's quiet mouth. They named him Milo, not for grief but remembrance. On warm mornings, Ellie carried him out in a sling and pointed at the clouds, giving each one a name. Inigo never rode far. Sometimes he went to Rivet Creek for salt or kerosene, but he always came back by dark. He built a 2nd room, then a porch, then a bench where he and Vera would sit in the evenings when the children were asleep. They never said much, just watched the wind move through the trees and let their hands rest together on the wood. He never again reached for his rifle in fear. She never again looked over her shoulder when she stepped outside. And when people asked where they came from, Inigo would nod toward the cabin and say, "From here." "From her?" Vera would smile, lean into him, and say, "And we're not going anywhere." and they never did.